A low rumble filled the street, the unmistakable sound of a motorcade approaching. A ripple of realization spread through the crowd like a shockwave. The phones already recording shot up higher. The energy shifted. Donald Trump had arrived. If you're watching this right now, like, comment, and subscribe. What would you do if you were in Melania's position? Should they have left or stood their ground? Let us know in the comments. The black SUVs came into view, their tinted windows gleaming under the city lights. The moment the first vehicle pulled up, Secret Service agents moved with precision, stepping out, forming a protective perimeter, and then the door of the lead SUV swung open. Donald Trump stepped out. The former president's presence was electrifying. Whether you loved him or hated him, you couldn't ignore him. The crowd outside the Astoria thickened. Pedestrians had stopped in their tracks. Some cheered, some jeered, but everyone was watching. Melania saw the way Sebastian Lou's face drained of color from inside the restaurant. He wasn't just nervous now, he was terrified. A waiter, a young man in his early 20s, abruptly took off his apron. "I quit," he announced. "I won't work for a place that does this." A murmur spread. Two more servers followed suit, tossing their aprons down. The crowd outside roared. Lou was visibly sweating now. His hands trembled as he adjusted his tie. "Mr. Trump," he stammered, "this isn't personal, it's just—" "Of course it's personal," Trump cut him off. "You made it personal the second you threw out my family." Liu hesitated. Then, in a final desperate attempt to salvage control, he squared his shoulders and gestured to security. "Sir," he said, voice wavering, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." For a second, everything stopped. And then Trump laughed. A sharp, humorless laugh that sent a chill through the room. "You think I'm leaving?" he said. Barron looked up, his height making him tower over his mother even while seated. He flashed the familiar half-smile that reminded her so much of his father. "Just texting Josh about tennis practice tomorrow, Mom," he said. "Coach thinks I might make captain next season." Melania reached over, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his sleeve. "I am proud of you." Their regular Secret Service agent, Mike Thompson, turned slightly from the front passenger seat. "Mrs. Trump, we're approaching the Astoria. The usual entrance?" "Yes, Mike, thank you." As the Escalade slowed near the curb, Melania caught sight of the restaurant's elegant facade, its golden lettering glowing warmly in the icy night. The Astoria had been a sanctuary for them, a place where, for a few hours, they could be just another family enjoying dinner. Over the years, it had been the backdrop to birthdays, celebrations, quiet moments of normalcy, stolen from the chaos of public life. "Braran was in my son's class at Columbia Grammar," another woman said, stepping forward. "He never once acted entitled. He's a kid, a good kid. And you're humiliating him because of his last name?" A young man raised his phone to the crowd, his live stream blinking as he spoke to his followers. "I work in finance. This isn't about politics. This is about how, in America, we don't punish people for who they are. This is wrong." A construction worker, still wearing his reflective vest from a long day's shift, crossed his arms. "I don't care who you are. A mother and her son shouldn't be thrown out into the cold like that." The momentum was shifting. Even some of the protesters who had initially jeered lowered their signs, watching the scene unfold with uncertainty. Because it was one thing to hate Trump's politics, it was another thing entirely to watch a 17-year-old boy be humiliated in public for something he had no control over. Inside the restaurant, Sebastian Lou was realizing, far too late, the depth of his mistake. He had thought this would be a minor controversy, a momentary inconvenience that would earn him favor among the elite social circles that now dictated New York's cultural hierarchy. Donald Trump stood tall, his presence commanding the scene, as Sebastian Lou, the restaurant's owner, stood frozen in the doorway, trapped in the very public reckoning he had unwittingly triggered. Inside, tables were emptying, more diners were walking out, their murmurs of disgust filling the once prestigious restaurant. The clatter of silverware against fine china had been replaced with whispered indignation and heated conversations about fairness, discrimination. But outside, something even bigger was happening. A woman, a stranger to the Trumps, stepped forward from the gathered crowd. She looked to be in her late 60s, her face lined with the kind of wisdom that only comes from experience. "I didn't vote for you, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice steady, firm. "Never liked your politics, but this isn't right." The words hit like a lightning bolt. Others started nodding, agreeing, voices rising in solidarity. It was no longer about politics. It was about something more fundamental. Right and wrong. Principles over partisanship. And then, one by one, people started speaking up. Ripple effect of injustice. "Good evening, Jean-Claude," she greeted, her voice smooth as glass. "Table 27, as usual?" The maitre d' hesitated. His fingers twitched against the leather-bound reservation book, his throat working as if he were trying to swallow words before they escaped. "Mrs. Trump, His voice faltered. "One moment, please." Before Melania could reply, he turned abruptly and disappeared through a door leading to the manager's office. A strange silence stretched between them. Baron shifted his weight, an old nervous habit from childhood. "Mom, I'm starving," he muttered. "I haven't eaten since practice." Melania smiled at him, reassuring. "Just a few more minutes, darling." But a gnawing unease had settled in her stomach. This wasn't a routine delay. Near the bar, a small group of diners had begun to take notice. A woman in a fitted Chanel suit leaned toward her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. "I can't believe they still come here," she sneered. "Or everything." The words were like a needle prick. Small, sharp, and intended to wound. Melania had heard worse, but that didn't mean it didn't sting. He had learned that some people would never see him as an individual, that some people would judge him, hate him, punish him, not for what he had done, but for who he was. And yet, he had also learned something else, something far more important, that there were still good people in the world, that dignity matters, that standing your ground, even when it's uncomfortable, is always worth it. Because in the end, truth has a way of revealing itself. Donald Trump took one step closer to Sebastian Liu, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the world held its breath. And then he smirked. Not a smirk of amusement, but of something far sharper. "You know," he said, adjusting the cuff of his overcoat, "you could have just served them dinner." The statement was so simple, so obvious, and yet so devastating. "You could have treated them like any other customer," Trump continued. "And you'd still have a business tomorrow." Leo opened his mouth to respond, but there was nothing left to say. Because the damage was done. Trump turned, placing a firm hand on Barron's shoulder. "Come on, son. Let's go somewhere that actually respects its customers." He turned to the crowd, then pointed directly at the Astoria's gold-lettered sign. "This place," he declared, voice booming, "was a great restaurant, but now it's a disgrace. And I promise you, this is going to be the most expensive mistake you ever made." The moment he said it, the internet exploded. Within minutes, "Boycott the Astoria" was trending. Conservative media outlets were pouncing on the story. Within an hour, reservations were being canceled. The battle was already lost, and Sebastian Liu knew it. To be continued. If you made it this far, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. What would you do if you were in Trump's shoes? Should the Astoria face conseguences for this? Let us know in the comments. Let me know if you want any further refinements. The street outside the Astoria had transformed into something unrecognizable. What had started as an evening dinner had escalated into a cultural battlefield, with cameras rolling, news vans pulling up, and social media feeds flooded with real-time footage. Inside the warmth of a black Cadillac Escalade, Melania Trump adjusted the lapel of her Max Mara coat and stole a quick glance at her reflection in the vanity mirror. Years in the public eye had trained her to maintain composure, to always present the image of effortless grace, even in private. Next to her, Baron sat with his long legs cramped in the spacious SUV, absorbed in his phone. "Darling, put that away," Melania said gently, her Slovenian accent more pronounced in these quiet moments with her son. "We are almost there." Instead, he had made a miscalculation that would haunt him, because in this moment, he wasn't the enlightened businessman standing against tyranny. He was the coward who had bowed to fear. Melania Trump watched it all unfold, her expression unreadable. But inside, she felt something shift. For years she had learned to endure the relentless scrutiny, the cruel headlines, the constant judgment from people who didn't know her, who saw her only as a symbol rather than a person. She had learned to stay silent in the face of condescension, to let slights roll off her back, to never react, but tonight had been different. Because this wasn't about her, it was about her son. Baron had always tried to stay out of the spotlight. He had never courted attention, had never sought to capitalize on his family's name. He was just a teenager, one who loved tennis, history, and his mother's home-cooked meals. And tonight he had been forced to learn in the harshest way possible what it meant to be a Trump in modern America. "I've been dining here for years," he continued, voice loud, unwavering. "The Trumps have been loyal customers." "You're throwing them out because of their last name?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. A woman near the bar, the one in the Chanel suit, the one who had sneered at Melania moments earlier, sighed dramatically. "Oh, please," she scoffed, setting her wineglass down with a clink. "It's not about who they are. It's about what they represent." Melania turned to face her. "And what exactly do we represent?" she asked, her voice smooth, controlled. The woman lifted a perfectly manicured hand, gesturing vaguely. "You know exactly what I mean. This city has moved on from people like you." The words hung in the air like frost. Baron shifted beside her, his jaw tightening. "Mom," he said quietly. "Let's go." Melania placed a hand on his arm. "No, darling," she said. "We stand." The woman let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh, how dramatic!" And then, just when the tension had reached its peak, the sirens. Just then, Baron's face lit up. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said, spotting a familiar face across the dining room. His AP history teacher. The woman who had always been warm in the classroom looked up, locked eyes with him, and then quickly looked back down at her plate. The snub was subtle but unmistakable. Melania's chest tightened. Before she could comfort her son, the maitre d' returned, flanked by a man in a crisp navy Zegna suit. Sebastian Liu, the new owner of the Astoria. Melania had read about the restaurant's change in ownership in the Post, but she hadn't thought much of it. Until now. Liu's face was a carefully practiced mask of politeness, but there was a nervous energy beneath it. "Mrs. Trump," he began, his tone clipped but controlled. "I'm afraid we have a situation regarding your reservation." The background noise of the restaurant seemed to dim, as if the very air had thickened. Melania felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression unreadable. "A situation?" Liu cleared his throat, his eyes flickering toward the growing number of phone cameras trained in their direction. "There has been a change in management policy." Her voice turned cool. "And what policy is that?" Liu hesitated, then exhaled. "After last week's protests, our insurance company has expressed concerns about potential security risks associated with certain high-profile guests." A slow, steady anger bloomed in Melania's chest. Baron, his teenage patience wearing thin, spoke up. "We have security," he said, motioning to Mike and the other agents discreetly positioned nearby. "We've never had any problems here before." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone near the bar muttered, just loud enough to be heard, "Trump trash." The words struck Melania like a slap. Perhaps Liu sensed the shift in the room, because his voice softened, placating. "Perhaps we could arrange a private dining experience for another time, under proper security protocols." Melania gave one last glance at Liu before following. As they stepped off the curb, the crowd erupted. Some cheered, some clapped, some stood silently, absorbing the moment for what it was. A lesson about fear, about dignity, about the importance of standing tall when others try to push you down. The next morning, the Astoria's phone lines were flooded with cancellations. By noon, the restaurant had lost over 30% of its high-profile members. Within 24 hours, the hashtag Boycott the Astoria had trended on Twitter, with tens of thousands calling for its permanent closure. Major news networks picked up the story, debating whether the restaurant had the right to refuse service or whether this was discrimination in its rawest form. A week later, Sebastian Liu held a press conference apologizing for the incident, but it was too late. His reputation was destroyed, and the Astoria? It never fully recovered. Within a year, it shut down. Because in the end, businesses rise and fall. But reputations? Reputations last forever. The events of that night weren't just about a dinner reservation. They were about something bigger. They were about standing tall in the face of public humiliation. Private dining, Milani repeated, the iciness in her tone making Liu visibly uncomfortable. We are not asking for special treatment. We are asking to be treated like any other paying customer. A woman from the bar, blonde, expensive, self-satisfied, chose that moment to step forward. I must say, Mr. Liu, she drawled, her voice oozing entitlement, I would be very uncomfortable dining in an establishment that continues to accommodate certain elements. Something in Melania snapped. She turned, years of composure colliding with a mother's instinct to protect. My teenage son and I are trying to have dinner, she said, her voice low but razor sharp. We are not an element. Mom? Baron touched her elbow gently. At 17, he had become adept at diffusing tension. Maybe we should just go somewhere else. Across the room, a young woman suddenly burst into tears. I'm sorry, she sobbed into her hands, her companion looking startled. Baron was in my daughter's class at Columbia Grammar. He was always so kind to her. And now this. Secret Service agents flanked him, keeping the press at bay, but he never broke stride. When he reached the entrance, he stopped, just inches away from Liu. Liu swallowed hard. Trump's voice, when he spoke, was low, controlled, and lethal. You know, he said, I've been coming to this restaurant for years. My wife, my son, we've spent countless evenings here. We never asked for special treatment, never asked for favors. A beat of silence. And tonight, he continued, you threw my wife and son out in the cold because some cowards told you to. Liu opened his mouth. Nothing came out. You refused service, Trump said, his voice rising, to an immigrant who became First Lady of the United States. You refused service to a 17-year-old kid whose only crime was his last name. Inside the restaurant, several customers stood up from their tables. She glanced at Baron, at the rigid way he held his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. He wasn't just humiliated, he was hurt. Her phone buzzed again. Donald, I said, don't move! Baron saw it too, the glow of the screen illuminating his face. He exhaled sharply. Mom, maybe we should just leave before this gets worse. But it already had gotten worse. A small crowd had gathered outside the Astoria, drawn by the whispers spreading through the restaurant. Phones were everywhere, lenses locked onto them, capturing their every move, every flicker of emotion. Inside, Sebastian Liu, the restaurant's new owner, was pacing near the front, murmuring frantically to his manager. He kept glancing toward the entrance as if calculating the cost of what he had just done. The air crackled with anticipation. And then it happened. A voice rang out from the back of the restaurant. This is disgusting. You don't treat people like this. All heads turned. A middle-aged man in a gray wool coat, one of the regular patrons, rose from his seat. His silver-rimmed glasses caught the reflection of the chandeliers above. She hadn't expected anything different tonight. The SUV came to a smooth stop, and Mike stepped out first, scanning the sidewalk. The moment the doors opened, the flash of phone cameras flared like paparazzi strobes. A group of passers-by had already noticed them. Oh my God, it's Baron Trump! A girl squealed to her friend, clutching her coat against the cold. He's so tall now. Melania ignored them. Baron, trained in the art of selective deafness, merely exhaled and stepped onto the sidewalk. She adjusted her coat, her silent armor against both the chill and the scrutiny, and walked toward the entrance with the kind of practiced poise that only years in the public eye could refine. Jean-Claude, the Astoria's maitre d', stood at his podium, his usual welcoming demeanor stiff, his smile forced. Melania knew him well. He had served them for years, had even once slipped Baron extra dessert as a child. But something was different tonight. The Astoria incident, a night of unfolding tensions. The January winds sliced through Manhattan's steel and glass canyons, a merciless reminder that winter in New York took no prisoners. Even in the heart of the city, where wealth softened the harsher edges of life, the cold did not discriminate. A gust whipped across Fifth Avenue, sending newspapers skidding along the pavement. their headlines blurring under neon reflections from towering billboards. The restaurant had become a stage, the Trumps the unwilling protagonists in a play unfolding in real time, being live-streamed for the world to judge. Jean-Claude, who had known Barron since he was barely tall enough to see over the podium, looked close to tears himself. "Mrs. Trump," he said softly, his voice trembling, "please understand, our hands are tied." Melania swallowed the burn in her throat, but her voice remained steady. "I understand perfectly, Jean-Claude." She looked at her son, at the way he tried to mask his hurt behind an expression he had learned from his father. "Come, darling," she said, "we'll find somewhere else to eat." As they turned toward the exit, her phone buzzed. A text from Donald. "Don't move, I'm 10 minutes away." Melania Trump inhaled deeply, steadying herself as the icy night air wrapped around her like a vice. The weight of humiliation pressed against her chest, but she refused to show it. She had endured years of public scrutiny, had learned to let words slide off her like raindrops on glass. But this wasn't just about her. They were about refusing to let fear dictate principles. They were about recognizing that injustice, no matter how small, has a ripple effect. Because dignity is not something given, it is something claimed. And sometimes, choosing to stand your ground, even in something as simple as a restaurant, can send a message that echoes far beyond a single evening. Because true strength isn't in how you retaliate, it's in how you refuse to bow. If you've made it this far, like, comment, and subscribe. What's your take on what happened at the Astoria? Was the restaurant justified, or was this outright discrimination? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and remember, never apologize for who you are. The end. Trump adjusted his navy overcoat, his red tie perfectly knotted, his expression unreadable. But Melania knew that look. She had seen it before. The look of a man who had just decided how the next few minutes of his life would play out. He took 2 steps forward. The reporters pounced. Mr. Trump, do you have a statement on what happened here tonight? Are you planning legal action against the Astoria? Do you think this is discrimination?" Trump ignored them all. He walked straight to Melania and Barron, his eyes scanning his wife's face. "You okay?" he asked. Melania nodded. "We are fine, but they think they can humiliate us." Trump turned toward the Astoria's entrance, where Liu now stood, frozen in place. The restaurant's once exclusive atmosphere had transformed into a battleground. With deliberate slowness, Trump strode forward,